Good evening, everybody. This is Steve from Real Progressives. It's been a while since we've talked economics. We've had a lot going on politically. But I wanted to take this opportunity to discuss Jill Stein's plan for student loan forgiveness and talk about Bernie Sanders' plans for spending over the next 10 years. Dr. Jill came out and said that she'd like to just get rid of all student debt. And she talked about it in terms of writing it off at the Federal Reserve, just writing it off, like quantitative easing of sorts, but for Main Street. Bernie Sanders, on the flip side, said that he wanted to spend $33 trillion over the next 10 years. So you have Jill Stein, who has the Green New Deal. You have Bernie Sanders, who is running as the New Deal, the New Deal, and both of them are advocating spending that is far exceeding the tax revenue either one of them would even remotely produce. It's very important that people understand this because it is the single largest factor blocking any meaningful progressive changes as long as all of us don't understand what monetary sovereignty is. Look, I used to be a Ron Paul guy years ago, and he talked about how bad the Federal Reserve is, and it's bad. But the Federal Reserve is not the one in charge of spending by the U.S. government. Congress is, right? So when you ask yourself about monetary policy set by the Fed is 100% about lending. It's about lending. It's about going into debt. However, fiscal policy is about our nation spending money from the government. Now, our nation owns its own currency. Debt denominated in our own currency can be paid off at any time. We do not borrow U.S. dollars from China. We do not borrow U.S. dollars from Brazil. We don't borrow them from Britain. We don't borrow them from the EU. We only make them because we are the sovereign. Why does that matter? Because if you're a sovereign entity, and please, I'm telling you, we can talk deep on the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve has got problems, but don't misconstrue and try and throw some old school logic that's no longer in existence about fractional reserve lending or fractional reserve banking. It's a Ron Paul, Austrian gold bug bullshit sandwich. And it really screws progress up. Don't conflate being a progressive with being an Alex Jones kind of Austerian. They're not simpatico at all. One, like Gary Johnson, wants to cut spending. Gary Johnson would like to do TPP because that's just the free market thing, right? But this matters for a number of reasons. Number one, I saw an article going around earlier that talked about the reason why we don't want TPP is because we're finding out the high prices of cheap imports. That would be true if our government was cutting spending. I don't know, like the sequestration. Or perhaps cutting food stamps. Whenever the government cuts spending, it literally pulls money out of the economy. It doesn't recirculate it. There is no piggy bank waiting there with crumpled up old dollars from 1947. Tax dollars are deleted from the system. They're purged. Excess reserves at the Federal Reserve are purged from existence. Why does all this matter? Because it means your taxes don't fund spending. Your taxes simply help offset inflation. Or, in our case of carbon taxes, which are very, very important to the climate change deal, they are what they call Pigovian, meaning behaviorally restrictive. In other words, they try to change the way you act on something. They're changing the way business treats carbon. They're changing the way business treats our environment. But it's not funding anything. And this is the fundamental thing that you'll learn about Jill And you'll learn about Bernie if you actually pay attention. Bernie Sanders hired Stephanie Kelton. She spoke at the People's Summit in Chicago. Stephanie Kelton has been all over the place. She was his hand-selected chief economist for the U.S. Senate for the Democrats, and she was his personal advisor for economic policy during his campaign. Most people don't even know that. It's infuriating to guys like me who love economics, but most of y'all don't even have a clue who Stephanie Kelton is. To make change happen, learn who Stephanie Kelton is. She is a pure genius. Learn who Randall Wray is, another Bernie economist that worked on his campaign, helped advise him. Genius. Look at William Black, genius. James Galbraith, genius. They understand. Warren Mosler. Now, Warren Mosler, I think I could say honestly, I don't think Warren was consulted, but the bottom line is that all this spawned from Warren Mosler. So look up Warren Mosler sometime, read his book, and it's easy. You can get it online free. I'll put the link in this later, called 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds. And it's all the austerity that they preach about how we have to cut spending, how we have to raise taxes and cut spending, which is another way of blowing up the gap between the wealthy and the poor, or the 99%. Dr. Jill gets this. If you look, she has got a massive New Deal spending package. If you don't understand it, how the hell are you going to sell it? If you don't understand Bernie's plan, how are you going to sell it? You don't. I have seen so many people talking about soaking the rich, which is fine. I mean, for different reasons. It doesn't fund spending. It's to change income inequality. It's to get them off their butts to do things that encourage them to spend money back into the economy to keep it going. Okay? Keynes talked about counter-cyclical spending, and that was typically thought of in a sense where government didn't have the unlimited means to create its own currency because we were on the gold standard, because we had to limit our dollars in production to the amount of gold that we had on hand. That isn't the case, hasn't been the case. It really hasn't been the case. Beardsley Rummel, who was a Fed chief back in 1946, wrote a paper called Taxes for Revenue Are Obsolete. Then in 1971, Richard Nixon removed us from the Bretton Woods Accord, which was the entire gold standard. Dollars were no longer convertible to gold. Why does all this matter? Because if you can't explain spending and you still think taxes fund spending, we will never see major climate change initiatives enacted. Never. You will never see free college truly enacted. Or if you do, they'll sneak it around and you'll hear all the lies. And it's lies because you guys still think taxes fund spending. They'll tell you, well, we're going to offset it. We're going to pay for that with cuts to the military. Or we're going to pay for that with, spending on or taxing the rich or doing this, that, and the other. Remember, taxing the rich may be a good idea to solve for income inequality or to get them to do different behaviors that we'd like to encourage them to do. But those dollars are deleted. It's just a debit and a credit at the Federal Reserve. Your taxes are deleted. It controls inflation, controls aggregate demand of the dollar, etc. I just want you all to understand this, so when you see Jill Stein come out with some outrageously large proposal, you won't let people like Paul Krugman bamboozle you again and start the pie in the sky nonsense. Hillary talking about how can we possibly afford Medicare for all? Pure, unadulterated ignorance. Libertarian logic. When I say that, I'm talking Mises Austrian nonsense. People still living as if we're on the gold standard. Now, when you know economics and you enjoy economics and you care about economics and you want to look how economics can save the world and save our country, when you realize the reason why we tax you, try to pay your taxes in gasoline. Try and pay your taxes in diamonds. Hell, try and bring anything you want, chicken necks, hog's feet, cotton, I don't care. Bring it to the IRS and say, I'd like to pay my taxes. They're going to laugh at you. You can only pay your taxes in US dollars. It'll start coming around to you in a minute. Now, when you start talking about states' rights and letting states do different things, I don't have a problem with it. The 10th Amendment's pretty specific. But when you give unfunded mandates to the states are not monetarily sovereign. The states have to tax in order to spend. They need a revenue stream, whereas the federal government is the revenue stream. If we were going to go broke, we'd have already gone broke. Seriously, if we were going to have sky-high inflation, we have increased the money supply a bazillion times. And we have had scarcely 3% inflation since 1982. If you look, I'll show you an historical inflation. You can't make it happen. You can't make it happen. They have tried like the dickens to make some inflation happen, and they can't make it happen. Because they're not spending into Main Street. So, taking it all the way down, when you look at the climate change, things that need to be done, changing out filters and stuff like that on factories, changing out cars from gasoline to electric, changing to renewable energy, changing the power grid to sustainable energy. When you look at all the different things that are out there, we could do them now, right this second. We wouldn't even have to raise taxes. I'm dead serious. This is one of those things where once you understand, you'll be able to support Jill Stein, you'll be able to support Bernie Sanders, and you'll be able to support future generations of progressive leaders as they give massive spending plans out to us that affect the 99%. Cheap imports. Let's talk about cheap imports for a minute, right? We don't like the TPP. The reason we don't like the TPP is because it takes away our sovereignty, really. It gives it over to corporations. It's the greatest corporate handout since the ACA, which is basically an insurance industry bailout. Let's be fair, okay? But cheap imports really are truly not our issue. We like cheap imports. We're trading our dollars, paper dollars that we own, the ability to print. We're trading them for goods and services, real hard goods and services. The only problem with that method is that our dollars are leaving the country. There's a drain at the bottom of the tub. It's a leakage. We're losing our dollars to the trade. So what has to happen? Our federal government needs to spend money back into the economy to make up for the leakages. It's simple. It's really not difficult. It's called sectoral balances. So you have your foreign balance, which is the trade balance. You have your federal balance, which is federal spending, whether or not we're in a surplus or deficit. And it all depends on the other two sectors. And then you have private debt. Well, guess what? The reason why Jill Stein and Bernie are talking about getting rid of student loans and why they're talking about free college is because we are about to hit another bubble. That's right. We're about to hit another debt bubble, similar to what we saw in the first recession, the Great Recession, right? We had so many leakages and we were not spending back into the economy. Then Obama came in with his stimulus and hardly any of that money made it back into the economy, but enough of it made it in there to keep us afloat. Now, why does that matter? Because then it stopped. Then they went into sequestration. Then you see all the stupid memes going around saying, Obama reduced the deficit. Guess what? We had 36,000 jobs created last month because of austerity. Shrinking deficits a la Bill Clinton, nothing to brag about. He handed W, as much of a jackwad as W was, he handed W a recession because of his grand surplus. That's right. He took money out of the economy. We can go toe to toe, man. This is one of those subjects you don't want to mess with. I know this inside and out. Got all the classical Keynesian training, all the Mises training. I learned Austrian economics. I learned all that stuff in college. Got my MBA, went through all the economic stuff, learned it, and that was the way I thought for years. But they teach a very, very flawed thinking. They teach you that this money has to come from somewhere. Well, think about it. If you just keep taxing the hell out of people, even if you tax the rich, it still doesn't pay for anything because tax dollars don't fund spending. It's just not that way. It is that way in Greece, though, and you're seeing what's happening to them because they gave up their monetary sovereignty joining the EU. So now Greece is bankrupt and they're freaking begging the EU to give them money. Begging them. Well, we don't have to do that. We've never gone to the EU or IMF and said, oh my God, we've got to borrow money from you because we're broke. We somehow or another ran out of US dollars. Anyway, this stuff matters. It really does. And if you look back, all this romanticizing about Bill Clinton's surplus, folks, that's what you're going to get with a shill. You're going to get more surplus, which means cutting spending, which means pulling money out of the economy. They have buoyed our economy with military spending. So we have got an entire economy completely dependent on the military right now. We have got to migrate away from that. And both Jill and Bernie have positions that do exactly that. Hillary will explode that just like a GOP, just like Reagan, just as if we're in the Cold War again. It's going to be that all over again. Very, very modest spending proposals out of Clinton. They don't even cover our trade deficit. So the leakages continue. And the budget shrinks until we're back to austerity measures again. And this is the Paul Ryan method. If you hate Paul Ryan and you hate the GOP and so forth, don't talk about their economic plans. These are Ayn Rand type nonsense, makers and takers. Okay? This is a principle that, well, I don't think they deserve to have medical care. F them, let them die. Their value is based on their ability to earn a living. That's Calvinism. That's what Clinton's all about. Calvinism sucks. It's a destroyer of all things good. So you got Jill, you got Bernie, and you got this cast of economic characters. Are you going to be the next guy that I got to call out passing around a meme saying, Obama cut the deficit? Do I need to really school you in public? I'm just joking. Not really. Don't brag about that. It's really a kind of a deal where if you look at the sectors, federal spending, private debt, and trade balance, if those are out of kilter, deficits may be absolutely necessary, as they are right now. We have got to blow up the deficit. It needs to go outrageous. I mean, we could spend so much. And the fact of the matter is that money growth does not cause inflation. Stop saying it. Quantity of money theory is no longer valid. You heard it. It's no longer valid. Not in a non-pegged, free-floating, sovereign currency, fiat currency, like the U.S. government has. I'm telling you right now, don't take my word for it. Just look at the proposals. Notice that their tax things do not add up. They don't even come close. And there's a reason for that. They're trying to expand the economy. Social Security, guess what? I'm going to bust another myth. Your paying into it is really to make you feel like you've been paying into it. So you feel a sense of ownership. Yeah, skin in the game. Skin in the game, Chauncey. Well, guess what? Skin in the game is Republican logic. You're not actually paying into it. Every dollar spent is dollars that are brand new. They are appropriated every year as part of their budget. They just get spent. They don't have crumpled up old dollars sitting there in the Federal Reserve waiting for them to redistribute wealth. It doesn't work that way. So anyway, this was a long, long talk here, but all of it is so important. If you don't understand basic economics since 1971, folks, remember that. The gold standard, foo-foo. It took 10 years for the Federal Reserve and Congress to figure out how to keep it from going like this. Well, guess what? You can't have bank runs anymore. There are not going to be any bank runs. Why is that? Because we can print our way out of trouble. We can. Don't be scared. It's true. It's absolutely 1,000% true. The problem is that we have been spending on bailing out corporations. We have been spending on bailing out every other friggin' terrorist nation, the nations that we funnel all these to dictators and we give Saudi Arabia arms, and that right there is where our money's going to. Our wars. It's not going to us. It's not going to our education system. It's not going to clean our infrastructure up. It's not going to clean our environment up. It's not going to take care of our health. It's going all the wrong places, and the wealth gap keeps growing. So if you really, really, really want to be a progressive, and you really, really, really like Bernie, and you love Jill, you better get with the program, because your economics should match, because otherwise, we got to tax, is not going to get it done. It's not, and you're going to be fighting a battle you don't need to fight. We need people getting health care today. Not tomorrow, not next year, not in 10 years, today. And the only way to do that is to understand basic economics and stop letting them tell you fairy tales based on Calvinism, so you're a good little boy and a good little girl because personal responsibility and bootstraps. I'm telling you, take my word for it. Anyway, this is Steve Grumbine with Real Progressives, giving you a little bit of economics to think about for the evening.